dark blonde hair, and perfectly kissable lips. The attraction had been immediate and overwhelming, and she'd lingered outside after the auction to light a cigarette in the bitter winter chill, hoping for another glimpse of him. 2 puffs in, she had begun to try to talk her naive and giddy self down. Malcolm's accent and business card agreed. He was American. Whether he was in France for business or pleasure, he wouldn't be there long. Casual flirting was as close as she could afford to get. She dropped the barely charred cigarette on the cobblestone sidewalk and crushed it under the heel of her black Kerrel boot, trying to stamp out any attraction to Malcolm along with it. Instead, the stiletto had promptly snapped off. Just as she lost her balance, wobbling and stumbling ungracefully, Malcolm had appeared, golden, muscular, delicious-smelling, to steady her. His dark eyes had glittered in the lamplight, although he was evidently too gentlemanly to laugh out loud at her awkwardness. "My car is right here," he'd said, and a wonderful, liquid gold rumble of a voice, gesturing toward the street. "And I'm going to have to insist on giving you a ride home, if only for the safety of other pedestrians." Before she'd realized what was happening, he'd scooped her up in his arms and strode easily toward a waiting limousine. Then she was ensconced in the warm, leather-covered back of the car, and Malcolm was handing her a flute of champagne. Elodie's head popped through the curtain of the dressing room, curls bouncing like springs. "You look gorgeous," she cooed, interrupting Jane's reverie and bringing her crashing back to the reality of the boutique. Flimsy clothes, ludicrous price tags, and a saleswoman who clearly knew she wasn't dealing with her usual clientele, as she'd been chatting on the phone incessantly since the 2 of them had walked in. "Your sexy American will never know what hit him." "I wish," Jane admitted honestly. "At least then we'd be even." She'd done her share of dating, naturally. You couldn't be a curvy 24-year-old blonde in Paris without getting asked out 1 or 2 million times a day. But she never understood what people meant by chemistry until she met Malcolm. Even the air around him felt heady and intoxicating, and she simply couldn't get enough. Her resolve to keep a safe distance had lasted all of 2 minutes once they were alone together in his limo, as had, in fact, her resolve to keep any distance between them whatsoever. Then she had been on the sidewalk, and the car was a pair of red lights vanishing around the corner, and the street light above her head had blown out with a rather spectacular shower of sparks that seemed to capture her frustration quite perfectly. Luckily for the city's electrical grid, we spent every night after that together, Jane thought ruefully. She and electronics had always had an uneasy relationship. Lights flickering, computers crashing, photocopiers spitting out reams of chewed-up paper, metro trains breaking down when she was in a hurry. Fortunately, her relationship with Malcolm was nothing short of blissful. They'd spent 3 weeks eating, when necessary, sleeping, barely, and making love more or less constantly, until Malcolm had regretfully announced an unavoidable business meeting in Italy. But tonight he would be back, and had suggested they try to maintain their composure long enough to have an actual date. And apparently, it was going to be a rather dressy occasion. Jane stepped out of the dressing room to examine herself in the full-length mirror on the main floor. She scowled in frustration at the embroidery along the hem. "I'm so last season, it hurts." At the counter, the saleswoman, a thin and rather pinched-looking blonde woman in her mid-30s, laughed as if on cue. She lowered her voice to a hush, no doubt whispering about her fiscally challenged customers. Jane blushed, and then mentally kicked herself for blushing. "Men don't notice things like that," Elodie told her.